This week's version of the Marvel Snap Decks of the Week is by far the most ambitious we've ever done, with 10 total deck lists featuring all the different archetypes in Marvel Snap. These decks have been designed from a data-first standpoint, analyzing a wide variety of sources to ensure that the data and the decks are relevant to both you, the player, and the meta in Marvel Snap. If you'd like to support the content, pressing the like button is the best thing you can do, as it sends a positive signal to the YouTube algorithm, and it also obviously supports the channel and is absolutely free. I really appreciate your support. And another thing worth mentioning is that we're actually going to be moving the Marvel Snap Decks of the Week to Tuesdays moving forward, as on Mondays you're going to be seeing the Snapchat featuring myself and Cozy on a regular basis. This is to accommodate the changes that are occurring throughout the week, thanks to the changes in the balance patch over the year updates on Thursdays for the month of May at the latest. Regardless, let's talk about the first deck, which is going to be Devil Dinohawk. Now, this deck does exactly what good cards decks are supposed to do. They put points on the board and they win games. This deck has a high 50% win rate, and essentially what you're looking at here is just a bunch of really good cards, including Zabu, Darkhawk, Devil Dinosaur, of course, and finally Dr. Doom, one of the most prevalent cards in the current meta. I do like the addition of Agent Coulson in this list, although honestly, Cosmo is a good option in this deck list as well to protect Devil Dinosaur and the Darkhawk from Shang-Chi. You have the disruption of Rock Slide, which is great in conjunction with Darkhawk, and obviously it's very disruptive to your opponent's hand. The key way to win with this deck, of course, is the use of Mystique. Whether you have Darkhawk or Devil Dinosaur, Mystique represents a very dangerous card in the hands of a player on turn 6. You can copy the Devil Dinosaur and provide some additional value, or with Zabu on the board, you can actually Darkhawk into Mystique for a game-winning play. Regardless, Devil Dinohawk is one of the most consistent decks in the current meta of Marvel Snap. Although it might be frustrating to some, Sandman Ramp represents one of the best decks in the current meta with a mid-50s% win rate. It is extremely disruptive to the combo-centric decks that you're seeing in these Sera-Caliber style lists, but overall it is a very strong list with a very straightforward play pattern and a very straightforward snap pattern as well, which is why it's favored by so many players. Essentially, if you have Electro on turn 3, you can consider snapping. If you're able to get Sandman out on turn 4, you should consider snapping. Like, it has so many things working for it. The major combo that a lot of people are turning to right now is the reinvention of Leader. The newly buffed Leader, as of the recent over-the-air update, is now viable again. And when you use Sandman, Leader represents an extra 2 power on top of whatever they're playing, even if it's a Dr. Doom. And what's fascinating about this is you can actually get that Leader out early on, say, turn 5 with the Electro, and then you can Odin the Leader to replicate the opponent's play once again, while also getting your own Odin on the board. It's actually quite a fantastic setup. That's one of the reasons why Sandman represents a very strong deck in the current meta. Sera-Monkey Control is one of the strongest burst decks in Marvel Snap, providing you with an opportunity to hit your opponents with an excessive turn 6 power spike. Now, this deck list, although extremely strong, is hard countered by Sandman and Wave, so if you suspect those two types of cards and your opponent is snapping, you might want to consider giving up your cube. Otherwise, you have the opportunity to really run up a turn 6 power play, especially when you consider that you have Angela, you have that Mysterio Bishop combination, because of course, Mysterio loves playing with Bishop for that +3, and Mysterio also gives a +3 proc to the Hitmonkey as well, giving it an amazing miracle-centric play. I do love the Nova into Killmonger combination as well, and you have the Enchantress, which has been extremely valuable, because not only does it counter all the Darkhawks and Devil Dinosaurs, but also Patriot, which we're going to talk about later, which is one of the most popular decks in the current meta. That's why this particular deck has a very high win rate, only truly losing to Wave-centric and Sandman-centric decks. It's one of the best out there, and honestly, if you have Hitmonkey, it's probably the best choice in this current metagame. Don't shoot the messenger here, but I have to talk about Galactus. I know this deck is extremely polarizing, but it's in a lot of decks right now. It is being played excessively. It is one of the most popular in terms of overall percentage play rate. So we have to talk about Galactus. And this, yes, this is the go-to Galactus deck. There are multiple variations of it as well, but this is like the most vanilla of Galactus. Now, one thing I will say is I feel like Galactus might be approaching a over-the-air update style nerf, because it's one of those cards that even the development team has said can't be the most popular deck in Marvel Snap. And it's kind of approaching that. Its playstyle is extremely polarizing, it's extremely frustrating, and I've even gone on record on the Snapchat saying that I kind of liked Galactus when it was like a random pull from an Agent 13 or whatever, right? Not necessarily a card in the game. That being said, I know there's a lot of people there that love Galactus. If you just pulled it from a cache or something like that, this is kind of a good standard deck. There's also other ones too, which I might do a video on in the future because I think there might be a change coming to Galactus soon. The Null package, the Death package, the Dr. Octopus. Obviously, you got the Hobgoblin as well, which helps to ensure that you can trade even a turn 6 Galactus. There's a lot of options here. But overall, Galactus, although polarizing, still represents a good opportunity to win cubes in Marvel Snap. The Patriot archetype is by far one of the most successful in Marvel Snap right now, both in terms of win rate and popularity. Although it's heavily countered by the Sera control list featuring Enchantress, generally speaking, it holds up pretty well to other matchups. One thing I will say is that it does do well against Galactus specifically, thanks to the inclusion of Debris and Cosmo. The thing about this deck that I really love in this version of it is the drop down into pool 3 of Super Scroll, which allows the Patriot matchups, the mirror matches I should say, to be in favor of the person with Super Scroll. Moreover, Super Scroll does provide some value towards the Darkhawks and the Devil Dinosaurs you might see on the opposing side of the board. The other thing about this deck that works really well, if you play a relatively early play pattern, if Patriot Mystique early on, turn 3-4 for instance, and then you can even turn 5 Abomination, it's pretty resistant to the Sandman meta because of the inclusion of Ultron and the ability to kind of fill the drone locations. Just be aware that like if you suspect a Sandman, if it's not on turn 4, maybe coming on turn 5, you might want to play down your Wasp and your other cards early on, right? It kind of takes some getting used to, but overall Super Patriot is a very fascinating deck that I think does a lot of things right. It provides you with a very consistent game plan and honestly can put up serious points in the current meta. There's been a lot of experimentation with Thanos lately, and last week we talked about the Thanos Destroy archetype, which has kind of been pretty popular. A new one that's been kind of re-emerging this past week is Thanos Ongoing Zoo, and people had kind of experimented with this on the onset of Thanos, but with the inclusion of Valkyrie in Pool 3, you're seeing an opportunity here to get really fancy with Thanos, and one of the reasons why Valkyrie is actually really good there is because you have the Soul Stone, and what's notable about the Soul Stone is that if you play the Soul Stone and the Valkyrie on top, you're going to set the entire location to 3 power, but the Soul Stone is going to trade your opponent down by 1, forcing you to get that dub. That's great. It's also worth noting here that Valkyrie isn't ongoing, whereas most of the cards in this deck are going to take advantage of Spectrum, which is a ongoing boosting card by +2. You have obviously the Soul Stone itself, which provides the ongoing effect. You also got an ongoing Power Stone as well, and then pretty much everything else in this deck is ongoing, including Khazar, which buffs up the stones themselves. You got Ant-Man, you got Goose, which is great. I think Goose is really making a comeback in the current meta. I really like what this deck does, and because it's a Thanos-based deck, your hand's usually topped up because the stones are constantly drawing, giving Devil Dinosaur a unique probability to basically be absolutely massive. This is a really strong deck. It provides you with a little bit of counterplay to Galactus with Cosmo, although still a little bit susceptible. Goose is also a good counter to the Galactus as well, because even if they wave, it still costs 4. There's a lot of options with this deck list in the current meta. It is fun to pilot, I will say. It's not quite as good as the original not nerfed version of the Lockjaw Thanos, but it's still something spicy worth considering. I gotta be honest with you, I just can't stop talking about Sera Surfer. It's one of those decks that has an incredible win rate. It's actually not all that popular on the meta right now, which is wild considering how good it performs. And the thing I really love about it is it has multiple Galactus counters naturally built in. I'm a huge believer in Goose. Huge believer in Goose. If they wave Galactus, they can't play on the Goose location. If you have, if you have an inkling of where they're going to be playing that Galactus, you can Polaris the Yondu or Wolverine or whatever into the location that you suspect. There is so much counterplay, even with Juggernaut. You can Juggernaut the Galactus. Galactus does not stand a chance against Sera Surfer, and it provides this really reliable play experience where, like, you're not scared of Galactus. You don't have to be. And although Galactus is in a ton of games, like almost 10% depending on the data source, too high. It's going to get nerfed probably. Sera Surfer, I think, provides you with a good opportunity to play a reliable deck that honestly does not necessarily have too many bad matchups. It does struggle against Sandman naturally. Sandman wrecks you for sure. Leader, not that much of a difference, right? But it's the Sandman specifically in the leader list which kind of dismantle your hand, especially when you're running Sera. There are some versions of this list I'm experimenting with without Sera, but I find myself often coming back to this and giving up that 1 cube against the Sandman style list. Overall, I do think Sera Surfer is in a great spot, and if you hate Galactus, this is the deck you should be playing. Doomwave continues to be one of the absolute best decks in the meta. I can talk about it every single week. If you're someone that really does not have that big of a card pool and you're looking for something to play that you know is competitive, this does not have that many expensive cards. Yes, it has the She-Hulk, Arrow, Doctor Doom, but if you've been playing for a while, and the Wave technically is a pool of 3 as well, if you've been playing for a while, these are all cards that have been like at the top of tier lists. You've likely spent some tokens on them in the past, and if not, well, then I hope you unlock them with that free unlock of the month, because these cards are great and this deck is great. It's relatively inexpensive compared to the others. It counters like the Sera Miracle style decks because you play Wave on turn 5, you conserve that 2 energy. That allows you to play She-Hulk +1. She-Hulk is a 2 power at that point, a 2 energy at that point, and then you can follow up with Doctor Doom for 15 across the board, Arrow for the disruption. You even got the Chavez for the pure power. It doesn't really matter. You have the options your opponent doesn't, because unless they've built a Wave-centric deck and they're holding a She-Hulk, then like they can't really benefit, right? So I do think the Doomwave kind of style deck list provides you with a ton of added utility. One thing I will say is I really do like the iteration of the deck where you take the White Queen out and you add Crossbones. I think Crossbones is underrated in conjunction with Mr. Fantastic. Is a very reliable 4/8 with Mr. Fantastic that can't get Shang-Chi'd. Of course, White Queen is still fantastic. I still love White Queen, but it's worth noting if you're looking to spruce up the Doomwave deck ever so slightly. I am happy to report that Discard is back. This version of Modok Discard is climbing in the ranks of the meta. It has a high 50% win rate, although not a whole lot of games. It's because Discard in general is kind of being slept on a little bit, and honestly, Modok is starting to get more popular as although it was a Season Pass card, it's actually on Series 4 now, so it's starting to get in the hands of more players, and I think people are sleeping on the combo. Now, there's a couple interesting things here. Now, first, the way it works is you do have the key cards of Discard of Colony Wing, which hits either the Wolverine or the Swarm, which then replicates in your hand. You got the Lady Sif, which is designed to hit that sweet, sweet Apocalypse. And then you've got the Dracula, which is great because if you play Dracula on turn 4, turn 5, you Modok. In turn 6, you should be left with your Apocalypse, which has been getting procced over and over again, your Swarms, which are now free, and a Chavez. You play the Chavez, you play the free Swarms, Dracula hits the Apocalypse for one last discard and gets nice and big. The one thing that I would consider, and like honestly, the data shows that the Swordmaster inclusion increases the win rate, but like I have always been a believer, and this is kind of like, this is a bit of a Bruce side of it, and I'm going to make a video about it soon, but I would actually rather get rid of Swordmaster and include something else. Like, you could even include Nakia for the, for the +2 power on the Swarms. That could be pretty wild, honestly, and it's something I'm looking to experiment with, because like in this deck, you don't really need to discard all that much, because like Modok is going to discard, right? It's going to discard, and I think the thought process here is that if you have the Swordmaster, it's a 3/6, and if you play the Colony Wing it's likely you have tons of Swarms, and you're more likely to hit the Swarms or the Apocalypse as opposed to like getting rid of your Modok, which is like basically a retreat situation, right? So I understand why a 3/6 that like realistically, if you're playing right and you got a good curve, you got multiple Swarms in hand, you should hit the Apocalypse and etc. Like I get it, but I think there could be some interesting synergy between Nakia, Swarm, Modok, and others, which might be being slept on as well. But overall, Discard is back, and I can't wait to experiment more. Hitmonkey Bounce is one of the primary ways to play Hitmonkey on the onset of the Hitmonkey Season Pass meta. Although it's fallen out of favor compared to the Sera Control archetype version, which I do prefer honestly, it does have some really interesting things going for it. In particular, the newly desired Pool 3 card, Bast. If you have Bast and you're looking for a deck for it, here you go. Bast really benefits everything in this deck. I do love the inclusion of Bast Hood. You got that demon, and obviously if you Bast that Hood, it's literally a +5 on the Hood. It's crazy. It's one of the best cards in the game being Basted. And then you got, of course, the Angela Hitmonkey combination with Beast. But most importantly, I love the integration of Black Widow, because when you Widow's Bite, you're disrupting a draw. You can bounce it back with Beast, play it again, disrupt their draw again, and even with just the Korg and those disruptions of draw, Darkhawk becomes suddenly viable in a deck list that like really doesn't have all that much disruption. I do love the inclusion of the Mysterio Bishop, because naturally Mysterio is 3 played cards for your Hitmonkey on turn 5 or 6. Bishop loves the idea of playing Hitmonkey in conjunction with Mysterio and a whole bunch of other cards. It's just a deck that really works. With that being said, I got another video for you down below. If you're interested in seeing more Marvel Snap content, you can watch that. I really do appreciate your support. Hitting the like button does a tremendous amount for this channel and my content. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you in the next Marvel Snap video.